you are listening and watching on video of a podcast of PTSMI and AFD Finance in Common Summit video podcast. I am your host, Andini Effendi. And as we approaching to the Finance in Common Summit, which will be held next week from November 11 to the 12th, we aim to discuss the role of public development banks and the green finance to achieve the SDGs. And this is more important because we are still in the pandemic of COVID-19. Our speakers for the podcast, first one is Mr. Edwin Syahruzad, CEO of PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure. Edwin, thank you so much for being with us. And also Emmanuel Baudran is director of the French Development Agency, or AFD. Hi, Emmanuel. Can you pronounce the AFD stands for?
AFD is the Agence Française de Développement.
I'll let you to do the correct pronunciation.
That's okay.
And
AFD is okay.
And last but not least is Andhyta F, Utami, or AFU, environmental economist and co-founder of Think Policy Society. Thank you for being with us, Afu.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so as we all realize that we're still wearing our masks, this is part of the health protocol by the Indonesian government. However, now we are safe to open it. Does everyone has the envelope?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can talk freely without boundaries. Yes. Okay, so we're talking about PDBs. What are PDBs? So public development banks, are also known as development financial institutions, are differentiated from commercial banks by their objective, which is to finance the development of countries without making a profit. They operate at all levels, local, national, continental, and all over the world through the financing they offer at international level. Currently, there are 450 public development banks worldwide with a total of some $11.2 trillion of assets in 2018. So, I would like to know why our PDBs are so important to finance the development. Maybe Emmanuel, you can go first. Why is it so important?
There's many reasons why public development bank are crucial for sustainable development, but maybe there's two I would like to highlight. Is first the capacity to mobilize huge fund, huge amount of money, mobilizing public and private fund. And the second one is the capacity to reconcile different objectives, different timing, short-term, long-term. So if you allow me to talk about the first one, the capacity to mobilize private and public funds, we know from 2015, the Addis Ababa conference, the UN conference in New York, and COP21 in Paris, that we will not have enough funds from budget government to tackle SDGs properly. We need to embark the private sector and other stakeholders in order to address all the challenge that fit with the objective that we set of the 17 objective of the Sustainable Development. And this is exactly what PDBs are doing, mixing public and private fund. You know, Public Development Bank is set up by a government bringing some budget in a capital as a company, public. And then we go on the market, we mobilize some borrowing. The market trusts us because we have the trust of our governments. And we are able to mobilize this market resource to then finance real project on the ground, providing the grants, the concessional loan, mixing both, and are able also to mobilize other kind of player like Green Climate Fund, philanthropists, or European Union, which is very supportive with European Public Development Bank. So, but when I say reconcile short-term and long-term, we are able to finance projects with immediate impact on the ground and long term. And we have this cooperation with the PTSMI, which is really important. And we have together financed, I would like to give you an example, a project in Java with the sugarcane factory.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually a need to expand the factory and at the same time to reduce the cost of energy. And this project, $36 million project, we co-financed with PTSMI. The short needs was to expand and to reduce the cost.
All right.
And so we finance a simple facility. We can burn the waste of sugarcane, to produce electricity. So instead of buying some electricity from the grid, which is produced in Indonesia mainly by fossil fuel, they have used their own waste. And so this is good for them. And
so
this
you
is
created like a circular economy within that project as well by managing the waste. So that goes to you, Afu. So what are the mechanism, I guess, we're talking about this, the importance of PDB?
Yeah, I think before going into the mechanisms, as has been touched by Emmanuel as well, I think the very nature of public development banks, which focuses on development objectives, which often involves sectors that are naturally not profitable per se, and therefore because these sectors are not necessarily profitable, especially in the short term, private sectors bank usually are hesitating to enter or focus on those sectors. So because public development banks prioritize on the development goals and will actually finance the type of projects that might not be necessarily profitable, especially in the short run, I think they can help flourish the sectors that are actually essential to people, despite the nature of the profitability. So I think in that sense, it's very important because otherwise, the private banks won't go into this. And some examples have been mentioned before. And in terms of the mechanisms, this is also the part that's interesting with public development banks because not only they provide lines of credits or loans, but they also have other types of schemes, including, for example, payments based on performance, or even more importantly, like grants. So these grants can actually be used to finance capacity building that complements existing projects and can help improve some of the development outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are ways that public development banks are different from the private ones.
Yeah, and as we all realize that we're still in the middle of pandemic, COVID-19, Pa Edwin, I guess in the context of Indonesia, what is the role of the development banks here, especially in the middle of this crisis?
Okay. Late 2009, Indonesia started to establish country-specific infrastructure banks, because that is, as mentioned by Emmanuel, there must be a specific mandate given to this institution. And for that time, Indonesia think that infrastructure become the priority for Indonesia to catch up with the goals of sustainable development goals and growth of the economy. And Indonesia realized there is a need for a long-term finance to be able to speed up infrastructure development. And starting from that year, Indonesia established PTSMI, which is in essence a development finance institution with a specific mission for infrastructure acceleration. And I think back to statement of Emmanuel, I think the competitiveness of the public development banks lies on the capacity to mobilize funding, whether it is from the government and from the public or the private side. And of course, the development banks, they don't have to aim for profitability, but they have to have a solid or healthy financial condition. Mm-hmm. In such way, they are they gain trusty from the investors, especially when they come to the public for fundraising. Mm-hmm. So the mixture of public funding and private funding, I think, is key, or is key to mobilizing funding in order to achieve a development mission. And I think that become very critical for Indonesia. And since, especially during the this pandemic crisis, the government, because of our reputation and our track record during 10 years of our establishment, the government trusts us and provide us with a larger mandate. And this is a transition towards the Indonesia Development Institution. They provide us with the change of our article of association, whereby we are enlarged, not only focus on infrastructure, but also be focusing more towards a development objective.
Perhaps you can also share the example of PTSMI and AFD collaboration, I guess, in response to the pandemic. What have you done, I guess? What is like the sort of like the incentives, I guess, that has been done?
Okay, first of all, our collaboration with AFD, first of all, is in the context of mobilizing of fund. We obtain loan or we borrow money from AFD, whereby AFD provide not only lending facility, but also some part of grant money. That is very beneficial to us, such that I think that loan is a combination of loan and grant, which is dedicated for the encouragement of the renewable energy or renewable sustainable energy infrastructure projects. And specifically for that, and since then we collaborate closely, both in not only in the funding but also in the technical assistance, since we have to learn how can Indonesia speed up the development of renewable energy, learning from the case of developed countries. Yes.
So I guess I would like to move forward with the discussion why our PDBs are so important during crisis. As we learned from Indonesia, it is very important, right, Pak Edwin?
Yeah. Of course, I think during crisis time, typically the commercial bank is like cyclical, conducted, they stop lending during the crisis because they see many projects become not feasible. But this is the contrary, to the commercial bank, public development bank, since they have like stronger funding capability or mobilizing capacity, they should react more counter-cyclical. They could lend more to the business or I think to the local government during crisis time, so that the economy can be quick recover from the crisis. That's I think what SMI is doing right now during crisis time. But we understand very clearly we are also exposed to the crisis because I think 80% of our portfolio is still on the private side. So the counter-cyclical policy measures that we are conducting is with regard to the lending to the public side, to the local government, so that we are part of the government economic recovery program. We obtain money from the government and we lend to the local government.
Afu, I would like to hear your thoughts on this, the importance of PDB, especially during crisis.
Pandemic. Yeah, I think first of all, PDBs in general don't have short-term refinancing needs. So this means that they can take the hit more than typical banks, I guess. So and that's why they usually provide loans or financing with maturities that are longer, that are equivalent to the resources. And this just means that in terms of payments, usually there's less risk for these public development banks. And that's why they can take more hit during the crisis. So during uncertain times like this, like Pak Edwin said, typically banks don't want to lend because there's too much risk of people not being able to pay back or just the recession in general. But public development banks, because they have their resources, they don't need to refinance quickly. They can continue to operate, and if anything, they can actually provide more financing counter-cyclically. So they can provide this help to local governments or maybe for multilateral banks, for national governments as well, during times of crisis, which is really important because that's when you need to spend and you want to spend because the economy is going through a recession.
Yeah. Manuel, I guess, what about examples from past crises? Because this is not the first one that we suffered from.
That's true. That's true. What I've been said is very true. The Public Development Bank can really play a counter-cyclical role because of their financing structure and because of their mission, as you have mentioned. And the crisis in 2008 has shown some example. While commercial bank reduced their exposure, the Public Development Bank has increased the disbursement. The average 36% of increase of disbursement is important. For in Europe, for example, the European Investment Bank, which is one of the largest public development bank in Europe, has increased by more than 50% their disbursement and more than 100% for SMEs. So on the past crisis, public development bank have shown resilience for their own structure, plus increasing of their activity. We will see what the COVID crisis will show. We'll analyze that, and during the summit there will be some exchange on that. But you can see in Indonesia that public development bank have really support governments. If I'm talking about international, the World Bank, our colleague from Asian Development Bank, KfW, the German, or the Japanese JICA, and AFD, Islamic Development Bank, and other public development bank, we have support the government to face this major crisis. You know that the government of Indonesia has really increased the support to the social program. They have extended tremendously, while they were receiving less tax income. So many public development bank has extended the program of budget support, which is one other tools that public development bank can provide. And also we try to be flexible. And you were asking what is our collaboration with PTSMI. You know, the last credit line we had planned together last year to have a $150 million for green infrastructure, renewable energy, public transport, water, and so on. With the crisis, when we discuss together, we say, look, okay, we need to address long-term perspective, but there's a need for municipal health, and your program, and that is very... So we adjust and reallocate 30% of the credit line dedicated to health infrastructure and respond to COVID, which is 45 million. So you see, public development bank are resilient and are flexible. This is what I would say during this crisis. And so they can play a real counter-cyclical role.
So with or without crisis, we need to also focus on the development of Indonesia, of course. And you mentioned now the allocation of the budget, it's more for the health infrastructure, which we also need, I guess, in general, right? So I guess who are the stakeholders in terms of we're talking about the Indonesian development? By Edwin, Indonesian government, of course, right? Being one. Yeah.
Of course, if we are talking about development, it started from the National Planning Agency, which form a 5-year development plan, and whereby we can refer to that development plan. And secondly, we also refer to the execution agency. It can be a line ministry, who are the ultimate responsible for the projects of underlying activities of this development objective, as well as local government. In this context, perhaps if we do have collaboration with the line ministries, it should be in the form of a PPP scheme, public-private partnership, because we cannot lending money to the line ministries. It has to be a central government who obtain money. And of course, PPP is becoming mainstream for our way of approach and there are a lot of line ministry involved in this, starting from Ministry of Public Works and Ministry of Transportation, Information, and I think it can grow more. Secondly, with regard to the local government, this can be done through ways. Yeah, we can lend to the local government as well as we can provide them assistance, such that local government are ready to offer a PPP scheme as well. So many local government has been in progress, yeah, with the PPP scheme, such as East Java province with Umbulan Water, Semarang municipality, Bandar Lampung municipality. So many of them, yeah, has been learned a lot from the PPP scheme, such that infrastructure can be accelerated in a better way. And lastly, municipal debt finance is something very new to Indonesia. Yeah. In absence of local or municipal debt or municipal bond market, I think we are playing very critical and crucial role, not only as a lenders, but also as development partners. I think that is much more important rather than just providing money without having an increased capacity. At the end of the day, is basically to enable them to provide a better provision of public services within their authority.
Then there's also international actors, right? And maybe you can explain more about that.
Yes, during this crisis, Indonesia can count on his partners, and there's many partners. Public Development Bank are one of them, and so bilateral and multilateral public development bank have been and will continue to be on the side of Indonesia during this crisis. So we all have some specification. I've mentioned the budget support that we could provide. In addition to that, for example, AFD provide French public expertise for major reform, where Indonesia is interesting. We did that in the past with the fiscal reform, with the port authorities, with energy, and many other colleagues from other public development bank, or more focusing on infrastructure, transport, health. Of course, during the crisis, the support from our colleague from KfW or the Public Development Bank on health was crucial. On AFD side, we try to focus on several areas, always linked to social and economic development of the country and climate change. We are Paris Agreement aligned 100%. So we try to address both in energy sector, in transport sector. It's not about stopping development. It's really to continue development, but on maybe a lower carbon way. So what we do on the energy is more related to renewable energy and energy efficiency. On transport, let's deal with public transportation. So we support the municipality of Medan to have a green urban mobility plan, because we need to continue, of course, to provide public transport and so on and so on. I would like to say that we have this specificity also to provide fund to state-owned enterprise and state-owned bank without the guarantee of the government of Indonesia. That means we don't increase the debt of the government, but we contribute to public investment.
Interesting. And Afu, of course, the civil society and NGOs have played their role as well. Perhaps you can briefly share the importance of their involvement there.
Yeah, I think in the journey of development, I think the civil societies play a very important role as the, let's say, moral compass of, where the direction of the development itself, and also as the hands and like feet on the ground. Because so first, in terms of moral compass, right? We have talked about the Paris Agreement. We have talked about how countries now come together to tackle climate change. But that has been a very, very long process. And without civil societies consistently pushing for the governments and the private sectors, the big emitter companies, to be accountable for climate change, there won't be the level of commitment that we see today. So these NGOs, these youth communities, mobilizing themselves in terms of climate change. Now they have the kind of Fridays for the Future protests where students all over the world, well, now it's the pandemic, so we don't really do that anymore. But before the pandemic, took their Fridays off as a way to show that this is a real concern for young people, and the government needs to do more. And I think not only on climate change, on a lot of issues, the NGOs really can be, again, the moral compass. Because I think when it comes to the government and the private sector in doing their in working their ways in development, sometimes there are political economy dimension where sometimes there's vested interests, or sometimes things get prioritized not in the way that the common people would want it. So I think being the voice, especially in democracy, right? I think the civil societies are that provides a moral compass, voicing out what the people actually care about, what the people want, and I think it's a really important mechanism to make the government and private sector accountable. And secondly, I think, so first is in terms of moral compass. I think secondly, as the implementers, I think other than local governments and local players, some NGOs who really focus on communities. For example, in Indonesia, we have many NGOs working with adat communities or kind of local communities, and they make sure that they have access to education, for example, that their homes and the resources that are important to them, the forests around them, are protected, and so on. So I think these roles are really important, and hand in hand together with the government and the private sector and the public development banks, they should all work together for a better outcome.
Okay, so we're talking about a lot about collaboration in this pandemic, right? So why do we need more collaborations in public development banks? I guess, you can start. Why do we need more collaborations in PDBs?
Yeah, I think among the PDBs first, right? I think we need collaboration across sectors as well, but especially among PDBs, I think it will really allow more concentrated efforts on things or issues that matter, issues that needs to be prioritized. I think without coordination, Bank A can finance this project, this other bank finance other projects, which I think in aggregate can, both can contribute to a larger, better outcome. But I think through collaboration and better coordination, we can really focus and concentrate the efforts on things that really require large amount of financing and cannot be tackled by a single PDB alone. So climate change is a really good example of that, because I think for Indonesia alone, the estimation is, correct me if I'm wrong, Pak, is around 250 billion within 12 years or something like that, especially to transition to renewable energy, waste management, to manage the landscape and so on. So this type of work, and that's for Indonesia alone, right? Globally, it's much bigger. So that kind of work cannot be tackled by one financing institution alone. So collaboration is really important. It will improve efficiency, and I think it can accelerate the achievement of those outcomes.
Edwin?
I think collaboration in the area of sharing experience, and learning from the best practice, I think it's quite important especially for Indonesia, in catching up with the development objectives. I think we can share the experience how to deal with the lending to the local government on the one hand, but on the other hand, we can also learn from the best practice of how other developed countries dealing with the better provision of infrastructure services for their own, because Indonesia need to catch up with this better provision of public services.
Right.
So that what kind of improvement, what kind of capacity building, and what kind of financing scheme which is better and efficient for accelerating this, I think is very important that we can learn from collaboration.
Emmanuel?
I would say the same as Edwin, is we need to collaborate and to learn from each other. For a simple reason, the motto of AFD is a world in common. We consider that we have this world in common, and we are facing similar transition, similar challenges. And we need to collaborate to do more first. The 450 development bank represent yearly more than $2,000 billion per year. So it's massive. It's 10% of the total investment in the world made by these 450 development. So we need to collaborate to do more, and we need to collaborate more to do better. How we can address what you have mentioned, how to work with NGO more and more. I would like to give you an example. After the tsunami in Palu, we could mobilize a small grant, a €1 million grant from our government to support the fishermen in Palu to recover and to rebuild their boats. There was 600 boats for them to restart their activity, plus the long-term perspective to replant some mangrove for carbon storage and protecting. So how we can better work with the NGO, how we can better work with other bank, mechanism for guarantee, how to address both agricultural development and biodiversity protection. There's so many areas where we need to do better, and there is existing already some collaboration. Of course, you have mentioned AFD and PTSMI, but there is a club I would like to mention is called IDFC, International Development Finance Club, for which PTSMI and AFD are part with our German, Japanese, Brazilian, and other colleagues. It's 26 national and regional public bank in the world. We are already collaborating, exchanging some experience, discussing practices and challenging in our business model and others.
So we will have a summit next week, which will be very important. But why is it important for us, for Indonesia? And what are the stakes, I guess, for developments here? Afo?
Yeah, I think I'm speaking on behalf of the young people, I guess. I think the next 10 years would really be like a make or break determinant for Indonesia and for all countries all over the world. Because I think in the next 10 years, we're facing some of the most challenging development issues, right? We have been talking a lot about the climate crisis, which many scientists say the next 10 years will define whether by 2030 we can survive the impacts of global warming. But I think other than that, for young people, we care about issues like social inequalities. I think before the pandemic, the Indonesian government has announced that we have managed to lower the poverty rate down from 10%. But I think because of this, the crisis, I think we can expect that there will be millions more, families who are before the pandemic perhaps vulnerable, but like they might fall back into the poverty line because of the pandemic, right? So I think the next 10 years would also define what kind of economy that we will build to recover out of the pandemic. And I think there is an importance of thinking in terms of like short-term and long-term priorities, because we can, spend or invest in the types of businesses that might bring sooner recoveries, but can be detrimental to long-term outcomes. So if we invest in brown industries, in the type of high emission type of infrastructure and so on, yes, it might, help the economy recover in the short term, but do we want that in the next, 5-10 years, right? So I think it's important to kind of balance that thinking. And the summit in particular, because of the scale, that so many public development bank stakeholders will be involved, I think the scale of financing that can be, coordinated better and allocated better into the types of projects that will recover the economy, while also looking at building back better in the longer term time frame is critical. I think the young people kind of puts our hope in the decision makers, right, who go to that summit to really take the time to discuss and think about how we can better finance the types of projects that are good for the people, but also for the environment. I think that's it.
I think from my point of view, COVID-19 pandemic and climate change are two development issues that are equally important. So we have to tackle those two issues in parallel during tough times. So I think the summit become very beneficial to us to learn the solution to these issues, and how can we tackle with these two issues, all together in parallel, in a better way, so that we can be, especially PDBs during this time, as everybody has known, become very important and critical counter-cyclical measures, and we can play a bigger role, and to fight or to tackle these two issues.
Just like Afu said, make it or break it, right?
Fully agree what has been said. We need to take this summit as an opportunity, and this time as an opportunity to both recover from the health, social and economic, and think the long-term perspective. We don't need to have a choice. We don't need to make a choice between these two. We don't need to make a choice between short-term and long-term. We need to find solution to address both. And this is the same for job creation and growth and biodiversity. This is the same for energy. In Indonesia, you have a need to access affordable energy like everywhere, and at the same time to address long-term perspective in terms of air pollution, in terms of climate change. It is not just to choose between two. We need to address both, and Public Development Bank, I guess, for energy, for public transportation, for agriculture, biodiversity, are the key player. And having for the first time a summit between this kind of actor will be really a massive event.
This will be the first summit, correct? Yeah. So Emmanuel, what do you expect?
It will be the first summit of this importance. What we expect is to have a joint direction, to take a collective action for Public Development Bank for what I mentioned, long-term and short-term. Let's share together what we could do better and what we could do more, concentrate the effort, you have mentioned it, but also share our constraint. And the second point will be also a recognition of this key player in the world for our government. And Edwin has mentioned the evolution of the mandate of PTSMI during COVID-19. It's good to see what are the other mandate of Public Development Bank also to learn.
Okay, I think as newly established Public Development Bank as compared to other world development banks, I think we're still in the mode of learning, and perhaps we can do also sharing our experience in our newly given mandate, and I think we need also to have set up a clear direction about these development objectives, and as well a commitment from all around the public development banks to go into the same direction, and so that we can be more focused and think of the solution in a better way.
Afu?
I speak a lot with students about green economy and, their concerns. And their question is always, like, Kaafu, why is change happening so slowly? Like, why isn't change happening faster? Because we don't have time. And I always answer that it's because the ship is so big, right? When you want to change the direction of a small ship, it can take, maybe 10 minutes. But it's a really, really large ship with 200 countries and so many public development institutions. And that's why when we want to change, without coordination, that can take a long while. Even with the same direction, that will change. It will take some time. So I think this summit, in terms of my expectations, it can really provide a critical opportunity for that, for the decision makers on the ship to come together and think about, what's the clear direction, what can we achieve in the next 5 years, 10 years together, through better collaboration and through concentrating the financing resources that we have better, so that, for the impatient youth out there, we can also see that change can happen sooner.
Yeah. And I guess with the pandemic, it's also like a reminder to create that change, right? So talking about the Finance in Common Summit is the first worldwide conference of this kind of actor, but it will be held online. So it will be a massive event gathering virtually more than 3,000 practitioners from Europe, America, Africa, Asia, Pacific, around the world, basically. And this is the place to be for development bankers in order to share experience and do better for a sustainable future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much for the first ever podcast video of PTSMI and AFD. Thank you so much for having me. And please tune in to the next week's summit. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.